Hi everyone, Tea Drinker here, and today I'm reacting to Black Sails Season 4, Episode 2. Are we going to start with Sylvie? I think so, because we're dragging the camera along the beach. There's his hand. Great shot. Hi, Sylvie. Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs.
What do you want from me?
I hope he's not like a sadist or anything like that. I wouldn't say he is. But you never know. Great beard. Love that.
Jeweler pays for these.
Which is so far?
The law pays for you.
Oh.
For Long John Silver.
Is that a good Irish accent? Is he actually Irish?
You're mistaken. I'm not.
Oh, please let him be Irish. An actual Irish person in this show, please.
I've seen you. Before you was Long. That's true.
If he's actually Irish, I'll scream.
More lies.
Hell yeah.
Fuck you.
Oh, his accent is a breath of fresh air. Oh. I'm so happy. I am following the story as well, don't worry.
Right.
Anything for you, because you're my friend.
The executions of the men captured on the beach yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been you.
Featherstone, what were you at?
I know you were responsible for Captain Rackham's escape.
Mm-hmm.
You intercepted his message. The warning that was to alert Captain Flint of the governors obstructing the harbor.
Interesting. Interesting.
My informants would be held immune from any prosecution for their prior associations with the pirates.
Okay.
Related.
Her voice sounds like it's coming through a tin can. I don't know what happened there production-wise.
My grandfather was a pirate of another sort.
Now that sounds better.
He could send us ships
Interesting.
and guns.
I now have something to offer them that may make the ask more attractive. You.
Mm-hmm. What's gonna be their conflict? What's gonna be their inciting incident? Yo!
Drifted into the harbour a little while ago. A message from Teach upon his return.
Oh yeah. Forgot about that setup.
Intends to sit, that we surrender to him the woman he holds responsible for the death of Charles Vane.
The seagull on top of one of the corpses was a very nice touch.
They're over.
Hi Jack. Hi Teach.
60 men.
Hi Anne. Hey Billy. Hey Maddie. Hey Flint.
And what choice did I have?
Yeah, literally.
The moment we arrived, he is the one keeping
Yeah.
the piece together.
Yeah, Maddie is so smart. She is so smart.
Rely on him. Had I not stepped in, who knows how destructive that could have become for everyone.
Mm-hmm. All facts, no printer.
Perhaps remorse is a bit much to ask.
We should be moving past this.
The smartest person in the whole show.
Going in it.
The smartest person in the whole show.
That's a very noble perspective. A note attributed
To Long John Silver.
John
Yeah.
Silver. I believe our current war is far from over,
She's so pretty.
and I believe there is more you could be doing to aid us in ferreting out those
Ooh.
radicals.
Conflict.
I alone am to be left in charge of Nassau's security.
Oh, great. What could go wrong?
Our Lord Governor and all
Oh, what a plot point.
forward very much to be working with you to that end.
Oh man, this guy makes my skin crawl. And now he's in charge. No me gusta.
A man who sailed with Edward Teach in
Ooh,
his early days, and one of the deadliest men that Nassau ever knew.
cool.
You talk too much.
Oh, the blood in the teeth. Oh, I don't like blood.
I'm a new beginning for Nassau.
Curious to see how much of this is him, like, talking his way into him. I'm really curious to see what's gonna happen with the conflict with Billy. That's so well shot. Oh my god, the way they did that all in the wide shot and then let the characters walk towards the camera. That is... Oh. Sometimes the directorial choices they make just blow my mind. They're so simple but so effective. Where are they gonna differ? Does Billy not like taking orders? What was that about? I could just have been misreading it, but I didn't get a good vibe from Billy there. Wise woman doesn't want a kid to be killed. What? Oh, okay. NASA without a Guthrie or a Rogers. Her breaths are like so accentuated with the way her dress is. Alone again. What are you thinking, Anne?
She tried to take you away from me. When I left that island,
Oh.
all I could think about was having a chance to make her pay. Don't want to live with it after. Sight of her hurt in that way.
What are you seeing? Oh, okay. I'm so curious. What's happening here?
From the inside.
Mm-hmm. What's happening?
How did you know that?
So they took precautions against any move that might incite revolt.
Yeah.
If we force a situation which might see these people's husbands and wives and
Yeah,
children
okay.
brutalized this way,
Yeah, gotcha.
many of them would
Gotcha.
take it in their own hand before they let that happen.
Yeah.
Take it
It
first.
would demonstrate to the slave communities the viability of our enterprise.
This is so
Show
interesting.
them that beyond revolt lies a safe harbor, with allies strong enough to protect
This is an amazing
them.
story.
Only way to ensure that the greatest number of them survive.
Militia's approaching. Neighboring estates must have heard the guns and rallied.
Just is what it is.
Oh god. Oh, the seeds of distrust have been sown.
There's been a change in circumstances. We're going to be moving back. We're not going anywhere.
Oh no.
Henry Davis, restrain the captain.
So that's it then. Christ.
Are you sure you want to keep following him down that path? Responsible for the conflict.
Oh shit! Oh my god. Bloody hell. It's a good thing I don't have a heart condition.
Would you like to know what I think?
Great shot.
Anne's mistrust of sentimentality.
God. Oh, Jack, I'm actually tearing up. Oh, I love you, Jack.
I asked him. He thought it meant
What did he say?
dinner. I don't know what made me think of that story.
Maybe we've already heard it. And the only choice is whether we choose to listen.
God, what a brilliant scene. What an absolutely fantastic scene. Are they seeing the firefight? Yeah. That music is phenomenal. As always. What's he up to? So clearly this is going to be some shape or form of ambush. Yeah. It's an ambush. 100%.
For it to end, you must end.
What's going to happen? Oh, this season is going to be the downfall of Max, isn't it? Regardless of what happens to Sylvie, Max is not coming back from this at all. You're joking me, the episode is not over already. Oh my god. I'm cutting right into the next episode. I'm cutting right into the next fantastic episode. You'll get the review. But I'm literally like taking a 10-minute break, making a fresh cup of tea, and screw doing the review for now. I'll do the review later. I got all the pertinent information anyway. A rewatch isn't necessary for exposition purposes, but fantastic episode. I was just so engaged with so many parts of it. The fight between Billy and Flint really, really, really surprised me, and that conversation between Jack and Teach. But look, obviously there's a lot to talk about, so for where I am currently, I'm going to take a wee break and then watch 403. And as for you watching the video, the review for 402 will begin now. Alright, so for Season 4, Episode 2 of Black Sails, we get this incredible opening scene. It starts off with this gorgeous view of Sylvie's body being dragged across the sand. And then afterwards, Sylvie is tied up. We see one of the governor's men to the opposite side of him tied up as well. Sylvie is not having a good morning by any stretch, and we're introduced to this character whom we don't know his name at this particular juncture, but as you can see from my reaction, I was pretty ecstatic over the fact that they had a genuine Irish actor doing an Irish accent. From just rewatching the scene, it's clear even just from the opening scene with him in and of itself that the dude's a dub. So hey, look, great representation. I mean, not that there's necessarily been like a lack of representation for the Irish in media. The day that I'm shooting this review, Cillian Murphy has just won his Oscar, so I'm not going to complain necessarily in that regards. But I think just because we had the character of Ben and that awful woman that was with Teach doing their attempts at accents, look, all I'm saying is that from my perspective, I'm happy to see it. And anyway, onto the scene itself. I think it does a great job of introducing Hans as a formidable character, just the way in which he's so ruthlessly killing the governor's man in order to add credibility to the letter that Sylvie is about to send. And of course, we see where the rest of the episode is going to go, of course. But nonetheless, just within this opening scene, we get great conflict for Sylvie in that, seeing as he's now only just one episode into being Long John Silver, and he's spent the majority of that time separated from his people, this seems to be an introduction of a true test as to whether or not Sylvie will or won't actually rise to the mantle of Long John Silver, and having a character like the mysterious bearded man be a foil for him in that moment. I just thought it was a really strong introduction to the episode. Following this, we get a scene with Max, Edel, and Featherstone in which we come to understand how it was that Featherstone's message wasn't relayed to Flint and would have prevented all of this horribleness from happening in the first episode of the season. And turns out it was Max. Turns out Max intercepted the message as a means to an end of making sure that Nassau was not overrun. What we get there is, well, first of all, we get the payoff for the setup of what it was that Featherstone did. Turns out not only was Featherstone innocent in this affair, but it came to be where his and Edel's actions kind of they came that, not necessarily that they came back to bite them, but it's more so that they've been caught with their pants down, that Max has been viewing them the entire time, and now that they're aware of that. But for Max's plot, it was great in that she makes it very explicit that she says she has a deal with the governor to make sure that the two of you will be granted immunity and my affairs won't be looked into, which of course we'll see where that goes the rest of the episode. And then we get this really great shot of Berenger where it's a close-up of his face with our guys in the far background, where we're hearing the sound of the nooses being tested. And she talks about him being a necessary, if temporary, evil. But just like doing that extreme close-up on his face as she's talking with the music underneath, I thought did an excellent job of further enforcing his role as an antagonist in this story. And also, I found out yesterday that actor playing Berenger is actually Toby Stephens's brother. He's Flint's brother. The two of them are brothers, which is great. There's some other little tidbits I found along the way, but I'll let you know as we watch the episode. After this, we get the scene with Rogers and Elle speaking before Berenger enters to deliver them some troubling news. We have it detailed to us through an exposition jump that Eleanor's family, the Guthries, are very well off. Her grandfather accumulated wealth over time, ironically through piracy itself, and then gained more and more power. But the actions of her father, Richard Guthrie, ended up tarnishing their reputation to the point where the distant Guthries don't really want much association with her at all. So it then leads to Elle telling us that the bargaining chip in this case is going to be Rogers himself. That if what they ultimately want is going to be, in many ways, reputation, then having someone of Rogers' caliber is going to be key to making that negotiation. So we get the want for both of them of the debts being repaid through the Guthrie family, but the conflict being that her reputation as a pirate is very much an obstacle for them even being able to speak with them in the first place. So I think that the constant back and forth between piracy and law and order, and the role of reputation and the role of just kind of morality, I suppose, for lack of a better term, is so interesting, and it's getting further enforced with this particular plot line. The plot line being that, again, it's so interesting, this particular plot line, because what Elle is trying to do is, of course, move on from everything and secure Nassau, and yet here both of them are having to repay their debts, one of them literally with Rogers trying to pay his financial debts, and then you have with Eleanor doing so with regards to basically her past as a pirate. So the only way for both of these characters to move forward is to actively deal with their ghosts, so to speak, to use that screenwriting terminology. So I get, just as that little introduction scene, I thought that that's a very interesting plot point that they're bringing in. It's funny because where I have it paused, having rewatched the scene now with Berenger, Rogers and Elle looking at the bodies up at the mast, like just where I have it, where it's paused right now, is Jack saying he won't turn her over, which is funny. So on the note of Elle having to deal with the past, here we have Teach wanting to hold Elle accountable for the murder of Charles Vane, that he's holding 61 of their men captive, and they will meet the same fate as these men who've been hung if Elle is not handed over. So it was a great payoff for the setup of Teach at the end of 401. Alongside that, it's just adding another layer of conflict and stakes to the characters of Rogers and Elle at this point. And like that shot of Rogers just looking so determined at this point, I gotta say, from a character perspective, Rogers is proving to just be more and more interesting as the story goes on. Like, he is truly unfaltering in so many ways as the story progresses. After this, we get just a tiny scene, which I referenced a second ago, with Jack, Anne, and oh my god, why is Vane always on my mind? I meant to say Teach. I'm just so used to saying Jack, Anne, and Vane. Be that as it may, we had Teach instructing what the next phase of the plan is going to be. We see Anne showing like a little bit of resistance, amicable resistance, and then seeing Teach's interaction with it. Just little moments like this do a great job of enforcing a character such as Teach as to the role he plays and kind of his level of expertise that he's always going to cling to in moments like these. Again, it's not necessarily the type of scene that has a huge amount to talk about. It's just those little moments. What I like about Black Sails is that even the small moments like that, even if they are just world building, even if they are just showing, I don't want to say meaningless interaction, but I suppose you could call it plot minimal character interaction. Just those little moments like that are things that I really appreciate seeing, because they add credibility to the characters that we're watching, to the fact that not every bit of dialogue is just going to be there purely to push the plot forward, that it is adding a sense of realism to the characters we're watching. God, I tell you, being able to rewatch this show is just such a joy, because every single scene has so much depth to it that it's truly worth going through all of it again. Like, you just can't catch everything the first time around. It's too much. We have Flint and Maddie talking, where it's revealed, as we suspected in 401, that Maddie was lying about knowing the whereabouts of the treasure, that was being said as a means to an end of kind of cooling down the conflict between Billy and Flint. which she was correct to do, because she pointed out to Flint, saying that Billy holds so much importance here, that the men look up to him and that they rely on him. And in just as many words, she does pretty much say it directly to Flint that, you know, you are going to be a threat to him and he is going to be a threat to you, which after she walks away, Flint does nothing to fight against that notion. And him and Billy share that look with one another. Because, of course, we know, having watched the full episode, we know exactly where that particular storyline is going to go. But nonetheless, in that moment, the way that they're able to establish the conflict between Billy and Flint is very, very palpable, but it's also valid for where both men are coming to, and how it's so complicated in that, you know, the men, they trust Billy, but it's not like they don't trust Flint either. And then you have all of Maddie's men as well, which makes things even more complicated. So just having that little interaction where so much exposition for the episode is set up with just really a few lines of dialogue and a whole lot of staring as well, I thought was very, very strong. In our next scene, we see Rogers is truly holding his own, and he is thinking through the options. He isn't the type of person that's going directly into the fight or directly running away. He is looking at all the options, which ironically leads to him and Elle having to be separate from one another in order to then, down the line, and be together. I think that from a writing perspective, that's so strong as a means of illustrating the strategic mind that Rogers has. That he isn't going down the line of, look, no matter what it is we're going to do, we're going to be together because we're not going to let him separate us. And instead, Rogers is able to see things 2 or 3 steps ahead and saying, look, in order for us to be together, we are going to have to separate, because Teach truly has us pinned in a moment. So it's a nice payoff to the initial conflict of the episode's plotline. And alongside that, the plot itself is giving space for Roger's intellect to come through. Okay, so our next scene with Max and Berenger, the dialogue is so great for how it handles subtext. So what happens in the scene is Max and Berenger discuss how the trials that's happening with these men, Max is against the fact that they would be happening publicly, that it's going to do more harm than good, and the conversation goes on in which Max is making it clear that she does care about Nassau and she is trying to protect it to the best of her ability, but she is afraid of civilization itself being harmed if they are going to be this brutal and this direct. And she references the pardon she's been given by the governor, both towards her and her informants. And with Berenger delivering the news to her with that, well, soon Rogers and Elle are going to be away from Nassau on completely separate ships, and that he is going to be the one in charge of Nassau and deciding the rules. He says to her that great line of saying that I'm look forward to your help in defeating our enemies. I'm paraphrasing, but he's saying something to that effect, and of course the subtext being that you are the enemy of Nassau, and either you are going to comply with my rule, or you could very much end up in one of those nooses yourself. So it's great in seeing that Max doesn't really have a leg to stand on against Berenger, not in this scene anyway. She doesn't have a leg to stand on that doesn't just allude back to some larger philosophical idea of, oh, what's going to happen to civilization? Well, you know, what good is civilization when my men's throats are being slit all in the name of dissenters who are advocating for the great pirate king of Long John Silver? In just as many words, he's saying that, well, yeah, I don't care about you disagreeing with this on a philosophical level. I don't care about anything that goes on in your head. What I care about is, are my men safe, and are Nassau safe? And most importantly, are they safe in a way that I deem to be acceptable? So having this sort of conflict where Max truly has the rug pulled from underneath her, in that she no longer has the confidant of Elle, and I suppose to a particular degree even Rogers, to fall back on. And as we're going to see in the succeeding scene, Max's fallout to that is going to be very true to her character. So in the scene in which Elle and Max are discussing the fact that Elle will be leaving, and we see Hudson working in the background, I know her name now, Toby Stevens' wife as well. He has this whole family on board. So Elle puts it in very pragmatic terms, is that Nassau needs to be safe, and yes, Berenger is the man that he is, but he is loyal. He is going to give some sort of structure, even if it's going to be something of a tyrannical structure. Nonetheless, this is what needs to happen in order for us to win the fight. And again, Max views things... See, Max's point of view, it's tricky because she is being practical, but it's practical in a way that seems to be dealing with abstractions and what-ifs. And she is correct. But in these moments, it's not enough to convince the powers that be that she should be listened to. She makes a fantastic point in saying that these men who are fighting, they're so enmeshed with the conflict that they're more afraid of the war ending than actually losing the war, which is an amazing... it's an amazing sentiment which actually deals with a lot of overarching themes of the show itself, in particular with Flint. I don't need to elaborate on that. So a character like Elle is a great foil for Max in that moment. And again, the scene does a great job of adding further characterization for Elle in this particular point in time. It gives us a little bit more exposition as to what it is that's within her head and her ethical argument for going down this particular path. Our next scene between Sylvie and Teach is just absolutely fantastic. Just great to see this progression of Sylvie in which he's met at the conflict of truly having to make the case to Hans that he is a man worth fearing and worth respecting. We get the exposition dump of Hans having been a former workmate for Teach. Let's say that he was a fellow colleague of Teach that was inevitably discarded and banned by Teach. And this leading to Sylvie just totally renouncing Teach, saying that we don't need a man like Teach, we need a man like me instead. And which, of course, will bring with it the central question, well, why should we even trust a man like you to begin with? Because who are you? And Sylvie delivers this great speech in which he's saying he's nobody. I'm absolutely nobody at all. I'm a wretch like you, and yet people are afraid of me. That the person I am is a person that I created. And for him to deliver a monologue like that to a character like Hans, who of course has had his reputation destroyed, is great because it kind of gives growth to both characters in that moment. But what I found the most interesting about the entire scene is that truly how afraid Sylvie is the whole way through this interaction, and indeed it's a fear that Hans himself can see. It's so interesting because it's very comparable, soft spoiler for Breaking Bad, in the I am the one who knocks speech, wherein that is a monologue that unfortunately gets very, very misinterpreted by wrong demographics of it being this like ultra masculine alpha, that's right, you can't mess with me kind of sentiment. But of course it's not. The whole point of that scene is Walter White talking himself into it as a means of alleviating his own fear. That this is a person who has been backed into a corner and now he has to walk forward, and he's walking forward in a way that is giving the appearance of being bulletproof, but of course he's anything but. And to a particular degree, I think that's what's happening here with Sylvie, in that he is very afraid of his situation. I don't mean the immediate situation of that Hans could kill him. I mean he is afraid to be Long John Silver. He is afraid to be thrown into the fire in this sort of way. But he knows he must, and Hans knows he must as well. And these things are practical in the sense of, regardless of who, like, again, coming up with that question of, well, who am I to be Long John Silver? Like, who is anyone to be Long John Silver? Well, at the end of the day, I'm responsible for these men having money. I'm responsible for these men being dead. I'm responsible for these men being afraid. So if I have the capacity to do those things, then I have the capacity to do those things, and nothing else truly matters. Because if I want it, I will get it. I think it was a terrific scene that pushes the plot forward. It gives us a better understanding as to the type of man Hans is. He seems to be the type of character that's truly going to look through Sylvie and tell him when his shit stinks, and more importantly, give direction for a character of Sylvie. And as for Sylvie himself, he is truly now committing to the role of Long John Silver. So next we get a really interesting scene in which our people take over the Underhill plantation. First of all, the action sequence itself was just absolutely fantastic. I love how even right before the action sequence we got a quick scene of the inhabitants of the plantation, like the way they speak to Ruth, and Ruth is just silently working in the background, and then she turns out to be a speaking role when Maddie interacts with her. The action sequence itself was great, just really to the point. I love that long take, which you saw in the reaction. But then when they actually get in, we get this great kind of twist in which it turns out that Ruth does not want to be saved, that they don't want this to happen, which it acts as, I don't know if you would necessarily call it like maybe a midpoint for their plot. You could arguably say that of an upcoming scene between Flint and Billy and their conflict. But nonetheless, whatever way you want to think of it in terms of the episode structure, it's a great conflict that has been interrupted, and that so much of our plan relies on us gaining the numbers via this plantation, and now to be told directly that our presence is unwanted is very, very intriguing. When that happened, I had no idea where that was going to go. And it's a payoff to what was happening 30 seconds earlier, in which Ruth purposefully takes the gun away from her master's hand. And when that happened, I was like, wait, what are you doing? They're white. Just let them die. So then seeing that this is actually part of something much more serious, in which is like, no, we don't want your presence here at all, was a very, very intriguing setup. Get a very short scene with Rogers and Elle making their goodbye to each other, and I like how short that scene was, because it does show that even though both of them are of course quite sentimental people, they are still able to be very practical and very pragmatic, and they understand the seriousness of this situation, that they are able to kind of get on with it, so to speak. But I suppose maybe another element, another way of looking at it, is that both of them are just so emotionally invested in the other partner that they want to keep it brief because it would just be too overwhelming. I think to look from the perspective of not knowing where the episode is going to go, and indeed the rest of the season is going to go, an interaction like that is very, very poignant, in that there's a great sense of mystery. I would also say that from the perspective of seeing the rest of the season, seeing not actually seeing a scene like that, but actually just seeing all the interactions between Rogers and Elle thus far, applying that into the larger context of the remainder of the season, which I've seen at this point, it is very, very strong. It is very strong storytelling, and again, just great use of characterization. But insofar of this episode, of not knowing where things are going, it creates a very great sense of tension and stakes. We got a great scene between Jack and Anne that then ends with them seeing the governor's banner. I love how scenes in Black Sails will operate within its own merit, and then they'll end the scene with something that's then going to set up a plot point for the rest of the episode. It's just having these moments of where it seems like it's calm, and then just adding that bit of tension at the end, I think, is a really great storytelling device to use. The interaction between Jack and Anne is just so great, seeing the mask slowly be chipped away for Anne. Of course, it had a major blow in season 2 with us learning her horrible backstory. I think, as I mentioned in the review for that episode, I actually can't remember if that was an episode I reacted to or I just reviewed. I think it was one I just reviewed, where seeing her, where she is nearly used as a sex worker in that episode, and her nearly kind of giving way to it, and the reasoning behind that. Like hearing the audio turned down during that sequence, it was just for me, the most harrowing thing in the entirety of the Black Sails viewing experience, one of them anyway, just on an emotional level. So to see her talk about how at this particular juncture she's in a position where she could go after Max, where she could thwart her, but she feels as though she would never be able to live with it, to see her hurt in that kind of a way. You know, there's growth there, but it's not so much. I don't view it as Anne kind of growing as a person so much as a particular weight being lifted off of her. In particular, if her emotional state has been constrained, this is one more bit of string that has been loosened to allow her just out in her natural way a little bit more. And it does a good job of giving us exposition as to where Jack and Anne's heads are with regards to moving forward. But at the same time, it's more important for me as a scene in seeing how Anne views herself in relation to the trauma. And she even says it with, like, you know, with that line, that fucking island, like how so much of what's happening is a direct result of their location. Of how Nassau is just it's very much kind of like a plot device in the same way the Urca de Lima gold is a plot device, and that's so much, it's just so much of the human experience is linked to this one location, to this one. It's something in which all the characters inevitably just orbit around because they have to, and then they bounce off of one another as a result. So yeah, really, really great dialogue there from Anne. So back to the plantation. There's two very big scenes here, so I'm going to split them up to talk about them. The first of the scene, we get exposition as to why it is that Ruth is so reluctant for Maddie to release the slaves. We find out that it's told to Billy, who has arrived later, that were any one estate to have their slaves freed, that would result in severe consequences for the slaves in the other estates, that the slave masters took it upon themselves to make sure that the slaves had been mass separated across the plantation, so that if you have a particular man who is rescued in one place, his wife and children could be severely punished in another. In other words, for this to actually happen, it's going to necessitate all 7 of the plantations being freed at the same time, which is good in the long run, but in the short term, for Billy and particularly his men, it means that they leave empty-handed tonight. And despite Maddie and Flint having a very reasonable argument as to why they need to retreat at this moment, they need to lose this particular battle in order to win the war entirely. Billy is valid to a degree, and maybe this is me having a little bit of protagonist bias from seeing where Flint is coming from, but I think that in a moment like this, Billy, it's not naivete so much as it is he's overly prioritizing the well-being of his men. And you can understand why. I don't necessarily think it's an ego thing with Billy. I think that for him becoming the de facto leader of this community, he has created this bond with the men that he doesn't want to hinder for the sake of defeating England. Meanwhile, Flint and Maddie, they don't want to prioritize Billy's men for the sake of losing a priority of defeating England. It's a very complicated situation to do with Flint and Maddie's loyalty to the overall picture and Billy's loyalty to his smaller picture, which to him, of course, is the bigger picture here, or at least the more important one. And so much of the conflict, which is as a result of Flint and Billy from their past coming up to get them, all the past conflicts, Billy is very much at his wit's end in having to deal with Flint and having to deal with everything Flint is doing, coming back to like the bigger picture or what we're trying to achieve in the long term. You really get the sense of Billy's frustration there. So it was a great way. It was something that I did not see coming at all. And then when it finally clicked and I see, oh, so this is what's going on. I gotta say, I just truly admire what I'm imagining is the level of research a show like this did. I don't know much about the production of Black Sails, how it came about, if it was actually adapted from one particular story prior to Treasure Island, or maybe a collection of stories. I'm very interested to hear about the historical accuracy this show has, because of stuff like that happened with plantations, which I can imagine it did. The collective punishment, just an absolutely barbaric way. Just not that it was a great way to be treating people to begin with, obviously, but that level of maliciousness in order to maintain power is so profound, and it's so interesting then comparing it to what Max herself, being a person of color, was alluding to when she was speaking about wanting to defend civilization itself from barbarians. And that, of course, leads us to the battle sequence between Billy and Flint. I mentioned before that when I watch these episodes for the first time around, I don't watch them with subtitles. I only have the subtitles on the video for you guys, so it's easier for you to watch and understand what's going on. So when Billy shouts fire, like, I am truly surprised by that. I did not see fire at the bottom of the screen. I truly did not think he was going to go ahead and do it. So I suppose that's, yeah, they're certainly paying the price for they get what they want when they arrive at the Underhill plantation, and they pay a toll for it. And that not only do they have to retreat, now they're weaker than ever because their numbers are divided between Billy and Flint. And again, so much of what Billy says does make sense and is reasonable, and you can see why he has come to the conclusions he's had. But now look at what's happened. Look at the weakened position he's in now as a result of him not just... Of course, it's easier said than done when you have the hindsight of, one, being an outsider and watching from the outside, and two, not being a pirate. But nonetheless, if it were me and I were Billy, just go along with Flint, just bide your time, and you can maybe talk about it tomorrow. Yes, the militia has arrived, but even if it were a thing of maybe it being delayed, and you can maybe regroup and try to... But then again, if the militia arrive and then they're obviously not just going to leave it for a day or two and leave the slaves where they are. So yes, you can understand the threatened position that Billy finds himself within. But if so much of this is going to be a personal vendetta, not necessarily against Flint as a man, but just against what Flint is representative of, well, look at the position you've landed yourself in now. I suppose the good and bad thing about Billy here, his strength and his weakness, is the faith he has in his men and his own ability and his willingness to work against Flint. So, and this is where we're at. So the scene between Jack and Teach, which I loved in the moment rewatching it, and now that I'm rewatching, not only am I rewatching this episode just in and of itself, but I'm rewatching this episode having seen the rest of season 4 and having completed the series now at this point. And I tell you, there's so many times when I say, now this scene right here, this is one of the best scenes of dialogue from the whole series and the whole season, blah, 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 blah. Because there's just so many moments like that. And as these reviews go on, there's going to be so many moments where I keep reiterating that sentiment. But I mean, it's just perfect. You get that gorgeous story from Teach of how the bird that he sees landing on the spring can be interpreted by those of the East as a dark omen, those of us as a positive omen, and Vane himself just views it as dinner. That amidst all the emotion and all the philosophy and all the brow furrowing, Vane's the most unrelentingly pragmatic person there is, and how can he not be as a result of him being a slave? And we get that from episode 308, I believe, of Vane and Flint talking in the kitchen, where he criticizes Flint's adherence to material goods. And, you know, Jack having that amazing line where he says that, you know, all this time I keep trying to think of what would Charles Vane say in this moment, and I realize, well, maybe it's been said to us already, and it's up to us whether to listen to it. And that questioning the entire motives behind what they're doing with regards to Eleanor Guthrie and indeed with Nassau itself. I love that scene because at the beginning, towards the beginning of it, as Teach is giving a bit of a precursor to the story, or indeed it's part of the story itself, he says that at that moment I had a question I did not know how to ask. And now the scene is bookended with it's bookended with an answer that neither man knows how to say out loud. It's a case, because yes, I can go into what that means for the rest of the plot, and not with the rest of the season, but just in this episode in itself, how a moment like that affects the rest of the plot, and how it affects how the plot preceding the scene has been affected by that unspoken question of, you know, the constant internal debate of what would Charles Vane do in that moment. And to me, I don't think it's really that important. I think what's important is that, because the text itself is so profound and so well written and so important into itself, but the subtext, the more thematic and philosophical things that's being dealt with there, are these two enormously competent men, Jack and Teach. These men who have no choice but to struggle with pragmatism in a way that Vane seemed to make so effortless, while still maintaining ethics and morality and compassion, some might even say. That both Jack and Teach are essentially saying in just as many words that we can never really be Charles Vane. That Charles Vane is always going to be not only a ghost to us at an emotional level, but his voice is always going to be in the best of our minds. It reminds me of an Orson Welles quote at Orson Welles when he was speaking of Jimmy Stewart, when he says, "We emulate you because that's the best we could do." In other words, either men, the best that they can do in this situation is try to think about things in the way Charles Vane did. That even if they had the capacity of what Jack is saying, that we've already heard what he has to say and now it's just up to us to listen. Well, I dare say that maybe listening to Charles Vane is too tall of an order, that the best they can do is just hear him, even if they're not able to fully listen to him. What a terrific show. We then get a short moment in which, well, the unanswered question kind of goes answered, in that Teach directly wants to make a course to sail as a result of Rogers leaving the port. And we then get this amazing shot, which I'll probably use as the thumbnail, of Elle and Hudson staring out at sea as that happens, just lit by that gorgeous light. And we see Max looking on concerned. We see that she's given a message to bring her to her interaction with Sylvie, which we'll see in the succeeding scene. And then we get this great shot of Beringer down below, who actually sees what's happening, and that happening on the heels of wanting to make sure that Max isn't an enemy to his efforts is it's a great way of adding stakes. But just that little scene kind of setting up the tension for the succeeding episode, setting up that plot. Just a little short scene that I wanted to mention anyway. One for that particular shot, I just loved it, like seeing the light glisten in their eyes. But it was also just a nice way to kind of add a bow to the interaction between Teach and Jack, in that whatever they do, they have to do something. They have to move on, even if they're not fully satisfied in their own minds about what it is they're doing. And finally, we get the big climax of the episode in which Max meets Sylvie, and it does not go her way. So she brokers a deal with Sylvie that in lieu of her handing over Sylvie to Beringer so that he can be murdered, or killing Sylvie herself so that the story goes away for good, instead she's going to imprison him. And as far as she's concerned, that's her debt paid. And it's a continuation of what was set up earlier in the episode in her conversation with Beringer of course, in the kind of very tangible external conflict of not wanting to be a spectacle for Nassau and seeing a public hanging. But more to the point, she's afraid of going down a dark path by killing Sylvie in the night like this. That's not the type of person she wants to be, and more importantly, for her to talk about defending civilization and then her herself taking part in her destruction is very, very poignant and very, very deep line of thinking that she's operating on. Max has always been a very intellectual character, but for her to have that level of philosophical depth as well, it's truly great to see. And of course, it just then gets thrown back in her face because Hans just starts killing her men, and she is forced to escape. Seeing that interaction again, it was great as well because then that adds to the characterization of Sylvie, who was struggling with the idea of Long John Silver, and that's at the top of the scene of Max saying Long John Silver is such a big name for such a small man, and then he basically says, you need to watch your tongue, you need to remember who it is you're talking to here, because of the power that I have and the power that my men will be. And again, it was a great way for her sentiment to then be thwarted by him saying, like, hey, look at all you've done, and yet Flint is free, Rackham is free, Teach is free, and him giving her the ultimatum of saying that you need to align yourself with me instead of the governor, and I expect money for that as well. So this scene worked so well in that, Max seemed to really have an upper hand there for a moment, and the physical prowess came through that both Sylvie and, of course, Hans himself are in no way intimidated by Max's ploy there. So it was a scene that operated very, very well in that regard of kind of bringing both of their characters, bringing both of their episode arcs to a conclusion at this point. Both of them are very much adhered to their own personal resolve. Only for Max, hers has failed in that she does need to regroup and start again. And given what's going to happen now in Beringer in the next episode, I won't say it in case it's a spoiler if you haven't gotten that far, but you can infer from the short shot we got of Beringer that he does see what's going on, and that she is very much going to be in harm's way because of this. And now that Sylvie is very much not taken care of, and he is a looming threat, has really raised the stakes for Max in a way that's great, not only for her external conflict, but again as a means of testing her philosophical conflict. And then, of course, of Sylvie's character, it was great to see him kind of fully come into his own as Long John Silver in this moment. So overall, I think it was a terrific episode. I can't believe there's only 8 episodes left for me to review now. I think I've said all I want to say about the episode at this point. I want to thank you so much for taking time to watch my reaction and a review, and if you've made it all the way to the end, I would like to end with a poem. Austen Clarke, The Planter's Daughter. When night stirred at sea, and the fire brought a crowd in, they say that her beauty was music in mouth, and few in the candlelight thought her too proud, for the house of the planter is known by the trees. Men that had seen her drank deep and were silent, The women were speaking wherever she went. As a bell that is rung, or a wonder told shyly, and oh, she was the Sunday in every week. Thanks for watching.